The bullet that grazed Willa Preston's shoulder in the middle of Main Street would have killed her if the cowboy hadn't shoved her aside, taking the impact meant for his own chest on his leather saddlebag instead. It was June 1878 in Beaver, Utah, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty street as Willa stumbled against the rough wooden post of the general store, her hand flying to her burning shoulder. The fabric of her calico dress darkened with blood, though not enough to be fatal. The cowboy who had saved her life stood between her and the direction of the gunfire, his hand hovering over his holstered revolver, his broad shoulders tense beneath his worn cotton shirt. "Get inside," he commanded without turning around, his voice rough but steady. "Now." Willa's heart hammered against her ribs, the shock of violence stealing her breath. She had only been in Beaver for 3 days, having traveled from St. Louis to serve as the new schoolteacher, and already she was bleeding in the street. The irony was not lost on her that she had left the civilized East to escape the suffocating expectations of her family, only to find herself in the line of fire in this dusty Utah settlement. "I said get inside." The cowboy's voice cut through her frozen terror, and this time Willa moved, stumbling through the doorway of the general store. The proprietor, a thin man with worried eyes, immediately ushered her toward the back room. Outside, voices shouted and boots pounded against the packed earth. Willa pressed herself against the wall, watching through the window as the cowboy remained standing in the street, his stance relaxed now, hands at his sides. Another man approached older with a sheriff's star pinned to his vest. "Anyone hurt?" the sheriff called out. "Woman took a graze," the cowboy replied, gesturing toward the store. "Nothing fatal. Who was shooting?" "Drunk miners from the camp north of town. Already got them locked up." The sheriff spat into the dust. "You all right, Thorne?" So that was his name, Thorne. Willa watched as he nodded, finally turning to face the store. Through the window, their eyes met for the first time, and Willa felt something shift in her chest that had nothing to do with fear or shock. His eyes were dark, almost black in the harsh sunlight, set in a face weathered by sun and wind. He could not have been much older than 30, perhaps 32 at most. A scar traced a thin line along his jaw, but it did not detract from the strong angles of his face. He removed his hat as he entered the store, revealing dark hair that needed cutting. "Madam," he said simply, "let me see that shoulder." "I am perfectly capable of tending to myself," Willa replied, though her voice shook slightly. She was 22 years old and had been raised to be independent, but the reality of nearly dying was settling into her bones like ice water. "No doubt," Thorne said, his tone neutral. "But I have field experience with gunshot wounds, and you cannot reach your own shoulder properly, unless you prefer to wait for Doc Miller, who is currently 3 miles outside of town delivering a baby." The storekeeper nodded confirmation of this fact, and Willa reluctantly allowed Thorne to guide her to a chair. His hands were surprisingly gentle as he examined the wound, careful not to cause unnecessary pain. "Clean graze," he pronounced. "Needs cleaning and bandaging, nothing more." "You are lucky." "Lucky," Willa repeated, tasting the word. "Yes, I suppose being shot at and only wounded qualifies as luck in this place." Something that might have been amusement flickered in Thorne's dark eyes. "In this place, yes. In any place, really. The world is not kind to those who forget to be grateful for survival." The storekeeper brought water and clean cloth, and Thorne worked efficiently to clean and bind the wound. Willa tried not to notice the warmth of his hands, the focused intensity of his expression, the way his fingers moved with practiced confidence. She had not come west to notice cowboys, no matter how capable or compelling they might be. "You are the new schoolteacher," Thorne said as he worked. It was not a question, I am Willa Preston. I arrived 3 days ago. Thomas Thorne, most call me Thorne. He tied off the bandage with a final gentle tug. Keep this clean and dry. Change the dressing twice daily. You will be fine in a week. Are you a doctor as well as a cowboy? Willa asked, unable to keep the slight edge from her voice. The pain in her shoulder was beginning to assert itself now that the shock was fading. No, just a man who has seen enough wounds to know how to treat them. Thorne stood, replacing his hat. Welcome to Beaver, Miss Preston. I apologize for the excitement of your arrival. Before Willa could respond, he was gone, striding back out into the brutal sunshine. The storekeeper exhaled heavily. That is Thomas Thorne for you, man of few words but solid as they come. Works the Triple T ranch just outside of town. Inherited it from his uncle about 5 years back. Willa nodded, still watching through the window as Thorne retrieved his horse from the hitching post. The animal was a sturdy bay gelding, well cared for and clearly devoted to its master. Thorne swung into the saddle with easy grace and rode away without looking back. The next time Willa saw him was 4 days later, when she opened the door to her small schoolhouse to find him standing on the threshold with his hat in his hands. The schoolhouse was a simple wooden structure with 6 windows and rows of rough-hewn benches, but Willa had spent the past week making it as welcoming as possible. Maps hung on the walls, slate boards waited ready for lessons, and precious books lined a single shelf near her desk. "Mr. Thorne," she said, surprised. "How may I help you, Miss Preston?" He nodded respectfully. "I came to check on your shoulder, wanted to make sure infection had not set in." Willa had not expected this. In her experience, men did what needed doing and moved on without looking back. "It is healing well, thank you. No signs of infection. Good." Thorne remained standing in the doorway, seeming oddly uncertain for a man who had faced down gunfire without flinching. "I also wanted to apologize again for your rough introduction to Beaver. You saved my life, Mr. Thorne." "You have nothing to apologize for." Willa studied him in the morning light. He had shaved since she last saw him and wore a clean shirt beneath his worn leather vest. She noticed details she had missed before: the intelligence in his dark eyes, the strength in his weathered hands, the quiet dignity in his bearing. "Would you like to come in? I have coffee on the stove." He hesitated, then nodded. "That would be welcome, thank you." Inside the schoolhouse, Willa poured coffee into 2 tin cups, grateful that her hands remained steady. She was acutely aware of Thorne's presence in the small space, the way he seemed to fill it without overwhelming it. He examined the maps on the wall with genuine interest, pausing before one of the United States. "You have been educated," he observed. "I attended Teachers College in St. Louis," Willa confirmed, handing him a cup. "My father believed in education for women, which made him unusual among his peers. A wise man. A complex one." Willa sipped her coffee, watching Thorne over the rim of her cup. "You speak like an educated man yourself, Mr. Thorne." "I had some schooling before circumstances changed." He did not elaborate, and Willa did not press. Everyone in the West had a history they preferred not to examine too closely. "How many students are you expecting?" 15, according to the school board. "Ages 6 to 14. School begins next Monday. You will do well." Thorne drained his coffee and set the cup on her desk. "The children here are hungry for learning. They just need someone to feed that hunger properly." Something in his tone caught Willa's attention. "You care about education." "I care about giving children opportunities I did not have." He retrieved his hat from the peg by the door. "Thank you for the coffee, Miss Preston. I should get back to the ranch." "Thank you for checking on me, Mr. Thorne." He paused in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright morning. "Be careful in town, Miss Preston." Those miners were drunk, but Beaver is rough country. A woman alone needs to watch herself." "I am quite capable of watching myself," Willa replied, stiffening slightly. "I did not come west to be coddled." "No," Thorne agreed, and there was that flicker of amusement again. "I suspect you came west for the same reason most of us did. To find something you could not find anywhere else. I hope you find it." He left before she could formulate a response, and Willa stood alone in her schoolhouse, troubled by emotions she could not quite name. She had not come west for romance. She had come for independence, for the freedom to teach and live on her own terms without her family's interference. But something about Thomas Thorne had lodged itself in her thoughts like a burr, impossible to dislodge. The week passed quickly as Willa prepared for her first day of teaching. She met her students' families, learned the rhythms of the small town, and gradually became accustomed to the dry heat and endless sky. Beaver was a supply point for ranchers and miners, a place where people came for necessities before returning to the harsh work of wresting life from unforgiving land. The town consisted of a main street lined with essential businesses, a small church with a traveling preacher who appeared once monthly, and scattered homes that spoke of hard work and harder times. Willa saw Thorne twice more that week, both times from a distance. Once, he was loading supplies into a wagon outside the general store, his movements efficient and practiced. Once, he rode past the schoolhouse at dusk, the setting sun painting everything gold and crimson. Both times, he touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement but did not stop, and Willa told herself she was not disappointed. School began on a Monday morning that dawned clear and hot. 15 students filed into the schoolhouse with varying degrees of enthusiasm. From 6-year-old Emma Holloway with her eager smile to 14-year-old John Carson with his obvious resentment at being pulled from ranch work. Willa met them all with calm patience, learning names and assessing abilities as she introduced herself and outlined her expectations. She discovered quickly that her students ranged from barely literate to surprisingly well-educated, depending on their family circumstances. Several of the older boys had to divide their time between school and work, appearing for lessons only when ranch or mining duties permitted. But all of them, even skeptical John Carson, responded to her genuine interest in their learning and her refusal to condescend to them. 3 weeks into the school term, Willa had established a comfortable routine and begun to feel truly settled in Beaver. Her shoulder had healed completely, leaving only a thin scar she could barely see. She had made tentative friendships with several of the town's women, including Sarah Holloway, Emma's mother, who ran the boarding house where Willa had taken a room. Life had taken on a pleasant predictability that soothed something restless in Willa's soul. Then Thomas Thorne walked into her schoolhouse on a Wednesday afternoon after the students had left, and everything shifted again. "Mr. Thorne," Willa said, looking up from the papers she was grading, "this is unexpected. I apologize for disturbing you, Miss Preston." He remained near the door, that same uncertainty from before shadowing his expression. "I have a question to ask, and I am not sure how to ask it properly." Willa set down her pen, suddenly nervous. "I find direct questions are usually best." "All right, then. Direct." Thorne took a breath. "Would you allow me to court you, Miss Preston?" The world seemed to stop for a moment, suspended in the golden afternoon light filtering through the schoolhouse windows. Willa stared at him, her heart suddenly pounding. What?" "I would like permission to court you," Thorne repeated, his voice steady despite the tension in his shoulders. "I know you have been here only a month. I know you came west to teach, not to find a husband. But I find myself thinking about you more than is comfortable, and I am not a man who ignores what he feels when he feels it honestly." Willa stood slowly, her legs uncertain beneath her. "Mr. Thorne, I barely know you, which is why I am asking to court you so we can know each other better." He met her eyes directly, unflinching. "I am 31 years old. I own my ranch outright, no debts. I am not wealthy, but I am comfortable. I do not drink to excess, I do not gamble, and I treat women with respect. I would treat you with respect, Miss Preston. And I think, if you are honest, you might want to know me better as well." Heat flooded Willa's cheeks. "You are very direct. You said direct questions were best." "I did I not?" Willa pressed her hands to her burning face, trying to organize her scattered thoughts. Everything in her practical, educated mind said this was too fast, too sudden. But her heart, that treacherous organ, was singing a different song entirely. "I do not know what to say. Say yes or no. Both are acceptable answers. I will not press you either way." Willa studied him, this quiet cowboy who had saved her life and showed up when she least expected him. There was something fundamentally decent about Thomas Thorne, something solid and real that called to her in ways she did not fully understand. And she had not come west to play it safe. She had come west to live. "Yes," she heard herself say, "you may court me, Mr. Thorne, but I have conditions." "Name them." "My teaching comes first. I will not give it up, not for any man, and I will not be rushed into anything. Courtship is one thing, but marriage is quite another, and I have no intentions of marrying quickly." Agreed on both counts. Thorne's shoulders relaxed slightly. "I would not ask you to give up teaching, and I am not proposing marriage, Miss Preston. Not yet. I am simply asking for the chance to see if marriage might be something we both want in time." "Not yet," Willa repeated, catching the implication. "You are very confident, Mr. Thorne." "Not confident. Hopeful." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his weathered face and made Willa's heart skip. "May I take you to dinner on Saturday evening? The boarding house serves a decent meal, and Mrs. Holloway sets aside a table for guests." "I live at the boarding house, Mr. Thorne." "You would be taking me downstairs to dinner." "Then I will be taking you downstairs to dinner on Saturday evening. 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock, Willa agreed, not quite believing what she was doing. "But if you bore me, Mr. Thorne, I reserve the right to end this courtship immediately." "Fair enough, and please call me Thorne, everyone does." "Then you must call me Willa, in private at least. Propriety requires I remain Miss Preston in public." "Willa." He said her name carefully as if testing its weight. "It suits you." After he left, Willa sank back into her chair, her hands trembling slightly. She had agreed to be courted, by a cowboy, by a man she barely knew but whose presence made her feel alive in ways she had never experienced before. It was reckless and impulsive and completely unlike her careful, planned approach to life. It was also, she realized with growing wonder, exactly what she wanted. Saturday arrived with agonizing slowness. Willa taught her students with half her mind on lessons and half on the coming evening, a division of attention she found both frustrating and thrilling. Sarah Holloway noticed her distraction and cornered her after school on Friday. "I heard Thomas Thorne asked permission to court you," Sarah said without preamble. She was a practical woman in her mid-30s, widowed 5 years earlier and raising Emma alone while running the boarding house. "I wanted you to know he is a good man, Willa, one of the best in Beaver." "You approve then?" Willa asked, surprised by how much she wanted Sarah's approval. "I do. Thorne has his ghosts like we all do, but he faces them honestly. He works hard, treats people fairly, and has never given me reason to doubt his character." Sarah hesitated. "He lost his uncle badly 5 years ago, took it hard. Has not courted anyone since he came to Beaver, far as I know. The fact he is courting you means something." "What ghosts?" Willa asked quietly. "Not mine to tell. If Thorne wants you to know, he will tell you himself." Sarah squeezed Willa's hand. Just know that some men are worth the risk of loving them. I think Thomas Thorne might be one of those men." Saturday evening, Willa changed clothes 3 times before settling on a simple blue dress that brought out the gray in her eyes. She braided her wheat-colored hair and coiled it at the nape of her neck, then studied herself critically in the small mirror above her dresser. She was not beautiful in the classical sense. Her features were too strong, her jaw too determined, her body too tall and angular. But her eyes were intelligent and kind, and her smile, when she allowed it, was warm. Thorne arrived precisely at 6, dressed in clean dark trousers and a pressed white shirt, his hair still damp from washing. He had shaved again, and Willa caught the faint scent of soap and leather as he offered his arm. "You look lovely," he said simply. "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself." Sarah had indeed set aside a small table near the window, away from the boarding house's other dinner guests. She served them roast beef with potatoes and carrots, fresh bread and apple pie for dessert, then discreetly left them alone as much as propriety allowed. At first, conversation came awkwardly, both of them careful and overly polite. But gradually, as the meal progressed, they began to relax. Thorne asked about her teaching, and Willa found herself talking animatedly about her students and their progress. In turn, she asked about the ranch, and he described the work of raising cattle with genuine passion. "I never intended to be a rancher," Thorne admitted as they finished their pie. "I studied law for 2 years in Virginia before the war ended." "The war?" Willa asked carefully. She had been a child during the Civil War, barely old enough to remember the fear and uncertainty. "I was too young to fight, thank God, but my family, we lost everything in the aftermath. My father had sided with the Confederacy. When the war ended and Reconstruction began, there was nothing left. No money, no land, no prospects." Thorne stared at his coffee cup. "My uncle wrote to me, offered me a place here in Utah. Said the West did not care about what happened back east, only what a man could do with his hands and his will. So I came." "And your family?" "My parents died of fever within 6 months of each other, winter of 1870. I had already been in Utah for 2 years by then. I could not get back in time for either funeral." Pain flickered across his face. "My uncle became my family after that. When he died 5 years ago, he left me everything, the triple T." "I am sorry for your losses," Willa said softly. "We all carry losses." Thorne met her eyes. "What brought you west, Willa?" "Really?" Willa considered lying, softening the truth. But she had asked Thorne to be direct, and she owed him the same courtesy. "My father wanted me to marry his business partner, a man twice my age who smelled of tobacco and treated me like a possession he was purchasing. When I refused, my father threatened to cut me off entirely. So I took what money I had saved, applied for teaching positions in the West, and left." She lifted her chin defiantly. "I would rather live independently on a teacher's salary than comfortably as a man's property." "Good," Thorne said with quiet intensity. "You should never be anyone's property." The conversation shifted after that, became easier and more natural. They talked about books and discovered a shared love of poetry. They discussed politics and found themselves in surprising agreement on most issues. They debated philosophy and religion, finding common ground and respectful disagreement in equal measure. When the meal finally ended and Thorne walked Willa to her room door, she realized hours had passed without her noticing. The boarding house had grown quiet around them. Other guests retired to their rooms. "Thank you for dinner," Willa said softly. "I enjoyed it very much." "So did I." Thorne hesitated, then took her hand carefully, as if it were something precious. "May I see you again? Perhaps a ride on Sunday afternoon if the weather holds." "I would like that." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent warmth racing through her entire body. "Sleep well, Willa. Sleep well, Thorne." She watched him descend the stairs, then entered her room and closed the door with a soft click. In the darkness, she pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart race beneath her palm. She was falling in love with Thomas Thorne. The realization should have terrified her, but instead, it felt like coming home. Their courtship progressed through the rest of summer and into fall, taking on a comfortable rhythm that felt both natural and inevitable. Thorne called on Willa twice weekly, sometimes taking her to dinner, sometimes on rides through the surrounding countryside. He showed her his ranch, the land stretching out in all directions beneath the endless sky. She introduced him to her favorite books, reading poetry aloud in the evening light while he listened with focused attention. They learned each other slowly, discovering preferences and quirks, strengths and vulnerabilities. Willa learned that Thorne rose before dawn every day, even when exhausted. That he had a dry sense of humor that emerged when he felt comfortable. That he was respected throughout Beaver not because he demanded respect, but because he earned it through consistent integrity. Thorne learned that Willa hummed while she worked, unconsciously and tunelessly. That she had strong opinions and no patience for injustice. That beneath her proper Eastern manners lay a fierce spirit that had brought her across half a continent alone. As autumn painted the landscape gold and crimson, their feelings deepened into something neither could deny. Thorne's kisses, stolen in private moments, left Willa breathless and yearning. Willa's laughter, bright and genuine, made Thorne feel truly alive for the first time since his uncle's death. They were falling in love completely and irrevocably, and both knew it. In October, as the first snow threatened in the mountains, Thorne asked Willa to marry him. They were sitting on the porch of his ranch house, watching the sunset paint the sky impossible colors. He had prepared no speech, no elaborate proposal. He simply took her hand and said, "Marry me, Willa. Build a life with me here." "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion he had kept carefully controlled until that moment. Willa responded in kind, her hands fisting in his shirt as years of propriety and restraint fell away. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "When?" Thorne asked, his voice rough. "Soon," Willa said. "I do not want a long engagement, neither do I." He kissed her again, softer this time. "The traveling preacher comes through next month, November 15th. Will you marry me then?" "Yes. Oh, yes." The news spread through Beaver like wildfire. Willa's students were thrilled. Sarah Holloway cried happy tears, and the town began planning a celebration despite the approaching winter. November 15th fell on a Friday, and the church ladies volunteered to prepare a feast for after the ceremony. Several ranchers offered to donate beef. The general store owner promised to provide sugar and flour for cakes. Willa wrote to her family, informing them of her engagement. She did not expect them to attend and was not disappointed when no response came. Thorne had no family to invite. But their chosen family in Beaver more than made up for blood relations' absence. As the wedding date approached, Willa and Thorne finalized plans. She would move to his ranch after the ceremony but continue teaching, riding into town 3 days a week for school. On the other days, she would teach students who could not travel to town regularly, holding classes at the ranch. It was unorthodox, but it allowed her to keep her promise to herself while building a life with Thorne. The night before the wedding, Willa could not sleep. Excitement and nervousness warred in her chest as she lay in her narrow bed at the boarding house for the last time. Tomorrow, she would become Willa Thorne. Tomorrow, her new life would truly begin. November 15th dawned cold and clear, the sky a brilliant blue unmarred by clouds. Willa dressed carefully in the new dress Sarah and the other women had helped her make, a simple but elegant creation in cream-colored wool. She braided her hair with trembling fingers, wove in the few precious wildflowers that still bloomed despite the cold, and stared at her reflection. She looked happy, radiant even. The woman in the mirror bore little resemblance to the frightened girl who had left St. Louis 6 months earlier. This woman knew her own mind and had chosen her own path. This woman was marrying for love, not convenience. This woman was free. Sarah drove Willa to the church in her wagon, both of them bundled against the cold. The small wooden structure stood at the edge of town, its white paint fresh and hopeful. As they pulled up, Willa saw Thorne waiting outside with a handful of friends, all of them dressed in their best clothes despite the chill. "Ready?" Sarah asked softly. "More than ready," Willa replied. But as they entered the church, they immediately knew something was wrong. The building stood empty except for the gathered townspeople, all of them looking confused and concerned. No preacher stood at the altar. The reverend who was supposed to officiate their ceremony was nowhere to be seen. Thorne strode up the aisle toward Willa, his face troubled. "The preacher did not arrive. We sent someone to check the road. His wagon broke down 10 miles north of town. By the time he repairs it and arrives, it will be too late. He has to be in the next town by tomorrow." Willa felt her heart sink. "What does that mean?" "It means he cannot perform the ceremony today. He offered to come back through in 6 weeks, before winter truly sets in. 6 weeks. 6 more weeks of waiting, of sleeping alone, of existing in the liminal space between promise and fulfillment." Willa looked at Thorne's disappointed face and felt her own disappointment threaten to overwhelm her. "I am sorry," he said quietly, taking her hands. "I know you were ready. I was ready too." 6 weeks, Willa repeated numbly. The gathered townspeople murmured sympathetically, and someone suggested postponing the celebration feast, saving it for the actual wedding day. Then John Carson, her 14-year-old student, spoke up from the back of the church. "Why do you need a preacher? You love each other, right? Just say your vows anyway." "It does not work that way," Sarah said gently. "A marriage needs to be legally recognized." "But the preacher forgot the ceremony," John insisted. "That is not Miss Preston or Mr. Thorne's fault. Why should they have to wait because some man broke his wagon wheel?" An older rancher named Peter Daniels nodded slowly. "Boy has a point. Seems wrong to delay their happiness because of circumstance beyond their control." "We could have a ceremony now," suggested Anna Mitchell, the banker's wife. "They could say their vows before all of us as witnesses. Then when the preacher does come through, he can make it legal official. But in our hearts and in God's eyes, they would be married today." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Willa looked at Thorne, saw hope and longing warring with practicality on his face. "I do not need a preacher to make my promises to you," Thorne said softly, for her ears alone. "If you are willing to say vows before these people, before God and this town, I will spend every day of my life honoring them. We can make it legal later, but we can make it real right now." Willa felt tears prick her eyes. Here was the man she loved, offering to marry her not in the eyes of the law but in the eyes of something deeper and more fundamental. Offering to pledge himself to her not because paperwork required it, but because his heart demanded it. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, let us make our vows right here, right now." The townspeople erupted in cheers and quickly reorganized. Someone produced a Bible. Someone else began humming a hymn. They formed a makeshift aisle, and Sarah squeezed Willa's hand one final time before taking her place among the witnesses. But Thorne surprised everyone. Instead of standing at the altar inside the cold church, He took Willa's hand and led her outside. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, and the first stars were appearing in the darkening eastern sky. "I do not want to make my vows in a building," Thorne said, his voice carrying in the clear air. "I want to make them under God's sky, under the stars that watched over the land when I first came here lost and broken. I want to make them in the place that brought me back to life, that gave me purpose, that led me to you." The townspeople followed them outside, forming a circle around the couple. The cold bit at exposed skin, but no one complained. There was something sacred about this moment, something that transcended comfort or convention. Thorne stood before Willa, still holding both her hands, his dark eyes intense with emotion. "I do not have fancy words prepared, but I have truth, and I hope that is enough." "It is enough," Willa whispered. "It is everything. Willa Preston, I vow before these witnesses, before God and before the land that has become my home, that I will love you with everything I am until the day I die. I vow to respect your mind, your independence, and your dreams. I vow to support your teaching and never ask you to be less than you are. I vow to be faithful to you, to provide for you, to stand beside you through whatever comes. I vow to build a life with you built on honesty, trust, and love that deepens with every passing day." His voice broke slightly. "I vow to cherish you, Willa, for all my days." Tears streamed down Willa's cheeks, freezing in the cold air, but she did not care. She gripped Thorne's hands tighter and found her own voice. "Thomas Thorne, I vow before these witnesses, before God, and before the sky that stretches endlessly above us, that I will love you with all that I am for as long as I draw breath. I vow to be your partner in all things, your equal, your friend, and your love. I vow to honor your work, your integrity, and the man you are. I vow to face hardship and joy beside you, never wavering in my commitment. I vow to build a home with you filled with laughter, learning, and love that grows stronger with each season." Her voice steadied with absolute certainty. "I vow to choose you, Thorne, every single day of my life." In the silence that followed, someone started singing, a simple hymn about love and faithfulness. Others joined in, their voices rising in the cold air. Thorne pulled Willa close and kissed her as the sun touched the horizon and the stars emerged fully overhead, brilliant and infinite. They were married. Not legally, not yet. But in every way that mattered to their hearts, to the community that had embraced them both, to the vast sky that witnessed their promises, they were bound together as husband and wife. The celebration that followed was warm and genuine despite the cold. Everyone crowded back into the church, which now served as a reception hall. The promised feast appeared as if by magic, platters of beef and potatoes, fresh bread, precious cakes and pies. Someone produced a fiddle, and dancing began in earnest despite the limited space. Thorne and Willa danced together, laughing and breathless, his hand firm at her waist, her head resting against his shoulder. Around them, their friends and neighbors celebrated with wholehearted joy, treating their union as if the preacher had been present after all. "Are you disappointed?" Thorne murmured against her hair. "That we could not do this properly. Willa leaned back to look at him. "Thorne, this is the most proper wedding I can imagine. We spoke true vows from our hearts, witnessed by people who care about us, under the sky that will shelter our life together." "What could be more proper than that? The legal paperwork," he pointed out, but he was smiling. "We will get the legal paperwork when the preacher returns. But we are married now, in the ways that matter most. I am yours and you are mine, and all the rest is just formality." As the evening grew late and the celebration began to wind down, Thorne and Willa said their goodbyes and rode back to the ranch together in his wagon. Willa's few possessions had been transferred there earlier in the day, and her room at the boarding house stood empty. The ranch house was dark when they arrived, but Thorne had left lamps ready to light. As Willa stood in the main room of what was now her home, she felt a rightness settle into her bones. This was where she belonged. With this man in this place, under these stars. Are you sure about this? Thorne asked from the doorway, watching her. You gave up so much. Your family, your old life, certainty. I gave up nothing of value, Willa replied firmly, and I gained everything. You, this life, freedom to choose my own path. I have never been more sure of anything. He crossed to her then, cupping her face in his work-roughened hands. I will spend my life making sure you never regret choosing me. I know you will, just as I will spend mine making sure you never regret choosing me. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a claiming and a giving that left them both changed. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms beneath heavy quilts, they talked quietly into the night, making plans and sharing dreams. I want children, Thorne said softly. Is that something you want as well? Yes, Willa replied. Not right away, perhaps, but yes, I want to fill this house with children and laughter and life. How many? As many as God grants us. She traced patterns on his bare chest. Healthy ones, I hope. Strong ones who can survive this land. Intelligent ones who love learning, Thorne added, like their mother. Honorable ones who keep their word, Willa countered, like their father. They fell asleep tangled together, content incomplete. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of adjustment and deepening love. Willa settled into ranch life while maintaining her teaching schedule. She discovered she enjoyed the physical work of running a household, the satisfaction of bread rising, preserves put up, clothes mended. Thorne proved to be a considerate husband, attentive to her needs and respectful of her independence. They developed routines that accommodated both their commitments. On school days, Thorne rose early to complete essential ranch work before driving Willa into town. On non-school days, Willa taught students who came to the ranch, transforming Thorne's front room into a classroom. In the evenings, they worked side by side on various tasks, talking and laughing and falling more deeply in love. Their physical relationship deepened as well, the initial awkwardness giving way to comfort and genuine passion. Thorne was a generous lover, attentive and patient, ensuring Willa's pleasure matched his own. And Willa discovered a sensuality she had never imagined, a hunger for her husband that only grew stronger. Word spread through Beaver that Thorne and Willa had married themselves under the stars when the preacher failed to appear. Some found it romantic. Others considered it scandalous. But no one could deny the obvious love between them, the way they moved together like two parts of a whole. When the traveling preacher finally returned in late December, he was met with the unusual request to formalize a marriage that had already occurred 6 weeks earlier. After some initial confusion, he agreed, performing a brief legal ceremony in the church with only a handful of witnesses. The paperwork was duly filed, making official what had already been real. Finally, properly married, the preacher proclaimed as he closed his Bible. Thorne and Willa exchanged amused glances. They had been properly married since November 15th, under the stars, speaking vows that came from their hearts. This was just bureaucracy catching up to reality. Winter settled over Beaver in earnest, bringing snow that piled high against buildings and turned the landscape into something pristine and otherworldly. School continued as weather permitted, though some days the cold was too brutal for children to travel safely. On those days, Willa worked on lesson plans and correspondence while Thorne tended to necessary ranch work. It was a hard winter, but they faced it together, finding warmth and comfort in each other. Evenings were spent by the fire, reading aloud or talking quietly while snow whispered against the windows. Willa taught Thorne to knit, laughing at his awkward attempts. Thorne taught Willa to play chess, impressed by how quickly she mastered strategy. Spring arrived in March with muddy roads and tentative green growth. The world felt reborn, full of possibility. And Willa, examining her own body's changes with growing suspicion, began to suspect new life was stirring within her as well. She waited to be certain before telling Thorne, consulting with the doctor during a trip to town. Dr. Miller confirmed what she already knew in her heart. She was pregnant, due in late September or early October. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching sunset paint the sky, Willa took Thorne's hand and placed it on her still flat belly. "We are going to have a child," she said softly. "You are going to be a father." Thorne's expression transformed from confusion to wonder to pure joy in the space of a heartbeat. A child, truly, due in the fall. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, his face buried in her hair. When he finally pulled back, there were tears in his eyes. "Thank you. Thank you for this gift, for choosing this life with me, for being brave enough to marry yourself to a cowboy under the stars." "Thank you for being brave enough to ask," Willa replied, her own eyes damp. "Thank you for making vows without a preacher, for loving me enough to promise yourself to me with only God and the stars as witnesses. Thank you for being the man I needed, even when I did not know I needed him." That night they made love with reverent gentleness, awed by the life growing between them. Afterward, Thorne kept his hand on Willa's stomach, as if he could feel the tiny heartbeat already. "Boy or girl?" he asked. "I do not know. Does it matter? Not at all. As long as both of you are healthy, I do not care." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through spring and into summer. Willa continued teaching until June, when the school term ended and the summer heat made travel uncomfortable. She spent those months preparing for the baby, sewing tiny clothes and making the small room off their bedroom into a nursery. Thorne built a cradle from oak, carving it with painstaking care during evenings on the porch. Their friends and neighbors rallied around them with gifts and advice, excited for the new addition to their community. Sarah Holloway promised to assist with the birth, having helped deliver dozens of babies over the years. Dr. Miller assured them he would be available when the time came. As Willa's belly swelled and the baby grew active, kicking and shifting inside her, she marveled at the changes in her body and her life. A year ago, she had been a frightened girl fleeing her family's expectations. Now she was a married woman, a teacher, a ranch wife, and soon to be a mother. She had built a life beyond anything she had imagined, and at the center of it all was Thorne, her partner and love. Labor began on a cool September evening, earlier than expected but not dangerously so. Thorne sent for Sarah and Dr. Miller while Willa paced the bedroom, breathing through contractions. The pain was intense, but she faced it with the same determination she brought to everything else. Thorne stayed with her throughout, holding her hand, supporting her weight when she needed to walk, wiping sweat from her face. He spoke to her constantly, encouragement and love and promise, anchoring her through each wave of pain. Their son was born just after midnight on September 23, 1879, entering the world with a furious cry that proclaimed his displeasure at leaving the womb's warmth. Dr. Miller placed the squalling infant on Willa's chest, and she stared down at him in wonder, this tiny perfect human they had created together. "He is beautiful," she whispered, tracing one finger over his wrinkled face. "He is perfect," Thorne corrected, his voice thick with emotion. He carefully touched his son's tiny hand, and the baby's fingers wrapped around his father's thumb with surprising strength. "Hello, little one," Welcome to the world." They named him Thomas Preston Thorne, honoring both his father's name and Willa's family, though her family remained absent from their lives. Little Thomas, called Tommy from the start, proved to be a healthy, vigorous baby with a strong appetite and his father's dark eyes. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful. Willa and Thorne took turns walking a fussy Tommy in the middle of the night, learning together how to soothe him and interpret his different cries. They marveled at every tiny milestone: his first smile, his ability to track objects with his eyes, the way he turned toward their voices. Willa returned to teaching in January, bringing Tommy with her to the schoolhouse. The older students helped watch him during lessons, delighted by the baby in their midst. It was unconventional, but like so much of Willa's life, it worked because she made it work through sheer determination. Their second child, a daughter they named Lydia, arrived in March of 1881, 2 months after Tommy's second birthday. She was quieter than her brother but no less healthy, with Willa's gray eyes and wheat-colored hair. Tommy was initially suspicious of this small person, who commanded so much of his parents' attention, but gradually warmed to the idea of being a big brother. Life settled into new rhythms as their family grew. The ranch prospered under Thorne's careful management, and Willa's reputation as an excellent teacher brought more students each year. They built an addition onto the house to accommodate their growing family, with Thorne doing much of the work himself with help from neighboring ranchers. Years passed in a blur of busy happiness. Tommy grew into a serious boy who loved books almost as much as his mother did. Lydia proved to be fearless and adventurous, following her father around the ranch as soon as she could walk. In 1883, another daughter arrived, Rose, sweet-tempered and affectionate. And in 1885, their youngest, Samuel, completed their family, a boisterous boy who kept them all on their toes. Through it all, through sleepless nights and childhood illnesses, through hard winters and drought-threatened summers, through the 1,000 small crises and celebrations that make up a life, Willa and Thorne remained deeply in love. They still made time for each other, stealing moments alone whenever possible, talking long into the night after the children slept. The town of Beaver grew around them, new families arriving, new businesses opening. But the core community remained tight-knit, bound by shared struggles and mutual support. Willa and Thorne's home became known as a gathering place, welcoming to all who needed food, shelter, or simple companionship. On their 10th anniversary, November 15, 1888, Thorne woke Willa before dawn and led her outside to the porch. The children were all sleeping safely inside, watched over by Sarah Holloway, who had agreed to stay the night. The sky was clear and cold, brilliant with stars. 10 years ago tonight, I made you promises under these stars, Thorne said, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. I told you I would love you until the day I died, that I would respect and cherish you, that I would build a life with you. And you have kept every single promise, Willa said softly, leaning against him. You have given me more than I ever dreamed of having. You gave me purpose when I had lost mine. You gave me love when I thought I would spend my life alone. You gave me children and laughter and a reason to face each day with joy. He turned her to face him, his hands cupping her face the way they had a decade earlier. I want to renew my vows to you, Willa, right here, right now, under the same stars. Tears filled Willa's eyes. Yes. Oh, yes. So there, on their porch under the infinite sky, Thorne spoke his promises again, his voice steady and sure. And Willa answered with her own, the words coming from a heart overflowing with love and gratitude and bone-deep contentment. I am the luckiest man alive, Thorne whispered when they finished, kissing her softly. "We are the luckiest people alive," Willa corrected, "because we found each other, because a preacher forgot a ceremony and you made your vows anyway, because we chose love over convention and it brought us to this moment." Inside, one of the children stirred and called out. Willa moved to go to them, but Thorne caught her hand, holding her back for one more moment. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything. For saying yes, for taking a chance on a cowboy, for building this beautiful life with me." "Thank you, Willa. Thank you for asking," she replied. "Thank you for being brave enough to love me, to marry me under the stars when the preacher failed to arrive. Thank you for every single day of the past 10 years, and for all the days still to come." They went inside together to comfort their child, stepping back into the warm chaos of family life. But both carried the memory of that moment under the stars, the renewal of promises made a decade earlier, the reaffirmation of love that had only grown stronger with time. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow. Sarah Holloway died peacefully in her sleep in 1890, leaving Emma, now a grown woman with a family of her own, to take over the boarding house. Dr. Miller retired and moved to California to live with his daughter. New faces appeared in Beaver while old ones faded. The natural cycle of a frontier town gradually becoming something more settled and civilized. Tommy, their eldest, proved to be brilliant academically, and at 17 he earned a scholarship to study law at a university back east, fulfilling the dream his father had once abandoned. Thorne and Willa sent him off with tearful pride, watching their serious, bookish son head toward opportunities they had worked hard to provide. Lydia married at 19 to a young rancher she loved fiercely, settling on land adjacent to the Triple T. She and her husband visited often, eventually producing 3 grandchildren who delighted in visiting their grandparents' ranch. Rose showed talent as an artist and spent hours sketching the landscape and people around her. Samuel proved to be a natural rancher, taking to the work with the same passion his father had developed over the years. Through all these changes, Willa continued teaching, though she gradually reduced her schedule as she aged. She had taught literally hundreds of students over the decades, many of whom returned to visit and share their successes. She took deep satisfaction in knowing she had contributed to the education and betterment of her community. Thorne continued working the ranch well into his 60s, though he increasingly relied on Samuel and hired help. The Triple T had become one of the most successful ranches in the area, known for quality cattle and honest dealing. But his greatest pride was not the ranch, but the family he and Willa had built together. On their 25th anniversary, their children organized a celebration at the ranch, inviting what seemed like half of Beaver. The house overflowed with food and laughter and music. Grandchildren ran underfoot while adults shared stories and memories. At one point during the festivities, Tommy, home briefly from his law practice in Denver, stood to make a toast. 25 years ago, my parents married themselves under the stars because a preacher forgot to show up for their ceremony. Everyone thought they were crazy, doing something so unconventional. But they taught all of us that day that love does not need convention. It needs commitment and courage and 2 hearts willing to make promises and keep them. They have kept their promises every single day for 25 years, building a life that has blessed all of us and so many others. To my parents, Thomas and Willa Thorne, the most stubborn, loving, remarkable people I have ever known. The crowd raised glasses and cheered. Willa looked at Thorne, saw the emotion shining in his eyes, and felt her own heart swell with joy. They had built something lasting and true, something that would continue beyond their own lives through their children and grandchildren. That night, after everyone had left or retired to guest rooms, Willa and Thorne once again stood on their porch under the stars. It had become their tradition, returning to this place on significant anniversaries, renewing their connection to each other and to the moment when they had chosen to marry themselves without waiting for official blessing. 25 years, Willa marveled. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like we have always been together. Both are true, Thorne said, pulling her close. His hair was silver now, his face deeply lined, but his eyes still held the same intensity that had captivated her all those years ago. Every day with you feels fresh and new. And every day with you feels like coming home. I love you, Willa said simply. I have loved you since the day you saved me on that dusty street. I will love you until the day I die and probably beyond. I love you, Thorne replied. You are the best decision I ever made, the greatest gift I ever received. Everything good in my life traces back to the moment you said yes to my clumsy courtship. They stayed outside until the cold drove them in, reluctant to leave the stars that had witnessed their most important promises. Inside, they climbed the stairs to their bedroom, passing doors behind which their family slept. The house they had filled with life and love, just as they had promised each other they would. The final years of their life together were gentle ones. They watched their grandchildren grow, welcomed great-grandchildren, and enjoyed the respect and affection of a community they had served for decades. Thorne's health began to fail in his early 70s, his heart weakening despite his still sharp mind. Willa, though frailer herself, nursed him devotedly, refusing to leave his side. He died peacefully on a spring morning in 1904, with Willa holding his hand and all their children gathered around his bed. His last words were for her alone, whispered so softly only she could hear. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for everything. Thank you for asking, Willa whispered back, tears streaming down her face. Thank you for marrying me under the stars. Thank you for giving me the most beautiful life imaginable. He squeezed her hand one last time and was gone, slipping away as peacefully as falling asleep. Willa lived another 3 years after Thorne's death, surrounded by family and sustained by memories of the love they had shared. She continued teaching almost to the end, unable to give up the work that had defined so much of her life. She spent time with her children and grandchildren, sharing stories of their father and grandfather, ensuring his memory lived on. She died quietly in her sleep on November 14, 1907, the night before what would have been her 49th wedding anniversary. Her family, going through her belongings, found a letter she had written and sealed, labeled to be read at my funeral. Samuel, as the youngest child and the one who had stayed closest to home, stood before the crowded church and read his mother's final words. To my beloved family and friends, I want you to know that I am going peacefully and without regret. I have lived a rich, full life, filled with more love and joy than one woman has any right to expect. I came west seeking independence and found so much more. I found purpose in teaching. I found community in Beaver. And I found the deepest, truest love imaginable in Thomas Thorne. Many of you know the story of our wedding, how the preacher forgot to attend, and how Thorne made his vows to me anyway, under the stars with only God and all of you as witnesses. That moment defined our marriage and our life together. We did not need official permission to love each other. We did not need convention to bind us together. We needed only honest hearts and the courage to make promises we intended to keep. We kept those promises for more than 25 years while Thorne lived, and I have kept them for the 3 years since his death. I remained faithful to him, to our love, to the life we built together. And now I am going to join him wherever he is, to continue the story we began under the stars so many years ago. Do not mourn for me. Instead, celebrate what I had. Celebrate the love that sustained me. Celebrate the choice I made to say yes when a cowboy asked permission to court me, to marry him when the preacher failed to arrive, to build a life in this harsh, beautiful land. Celebrate the fact that love, real love, can overcome any obstacle and sustain us through anything. And if you take anything from my life, let it be this: do not wait for permission to love. Do not let convention dictate your heart. When you find something real and true, grab it with both hands and hold on tight. Make your vows under the stars if you must, without preachers or paperwork or official blessing. Because in the end, love does not need any of that. It only needs two hearts willing to commit, and the courage to honor that commitment every single day. I go now to join my beloved Thomas, the cowboy who made his vows under the stars and kept them until his dying breath. What more could any woman ask than to be loved so completely, so faithfully, so truly? I leave this life with gratitude and joy, secure in the knowledge that I loved well and was loved well in return. Thank you all for sharing this journey with me. Thank you for witnessing my vows and honoring my marriage. Thank you for making Beaver a true home. Thank you for everything. With love and gratitude, Willa Preston Thorne. By the time Samuel finished reading, there was not a dry eye in the church. The same church where, nearly 50 years earlier, a preacher had failed to appear and a cowboy had taken his bride outside to marry themselves under the stars. Willa was buried next to Thorne in the small cemetery overlooking the valley, under the same stars that had witnessed their promises. Their children commissioned a shared headstone, simple but beautiful, that read, Thomas Thorne, 1847–1904, Willa Preston Thorne, 1856–1907, married November 15, 1878 under the stars, by their own vows together forever in the years that followed. Their story became legend in Beaver and the surrounding territory. Young couples facing obstacles would remind each other of the preacher who forgot the ceremony, and the cowboy who made his vows anyway under the stars. The story became a symbol of love's power to transcend convention, of commitment that needs no official blessing, of two hearts brave enough to promise themselves to each other on their own terms. The Triple T Ranch continued to prosper under Samuel's management, eventually passing to his children and their children after that. The house Thorne had built and expanded over the years remained standing, occupied by generation after generation of their descendants. And on the porch where Willa and Thorne had renewed their vows so many times, their great-great-grandchildren would sit on clear nights and look up at the stars, remembering the story of two people who loved each other enough to forge their own path. Tommy Thorne became a successful lawyer and eventually a judge, known for his integrity and compassion. He never forgot the lessons his parents taught him about courage and commitment. Lydia's ranch prospered alongside the Triple T, and her children grew up knowing the value of hard work and family. Rose's artwork was eventually exhibited in galleries throughout the West, her paintings capturing the beauty of the land her parents loved. Samuel became one of the most respected ranchers in Utah, following in his father's footsteps in every way that mattered. All of them raised their children with stories of Willa and Thorne, ensuring their grandparents' love story lived on. They taught their children that love requires courage, that commitment transcends paperwork, that the most important promises are those made from the heart and kept through action. The schoolhouse where Willa taught for so many years was eventually replaced by a larger brick building, but a plaque outside commemorated her service. In memory of Willa Preston Thorne, teacher, who educated generations of Beaver's children with patience, intelligence, and love. 1878–1900. The ranch house still stood a century later, carefully preserved by descendants who understood its significance. On the porch, worn smooth by generations of feet, you could almost feel the presence of two people who had stood there so many times, looking up at the stars, renewing promises made under that same sky. Visitors to the Beaver cemetery still sought out Willa and Thorne's grave, drawn by the story of their unconventional wedding. Fresh flowers appeared regularly, left by descendants and strangers alike who found inspiration in their enduring love. Their story became part of the fabric of the West itself, one of countless tales of courage and determination that defined the frontier era. But unlike stories of outlaws and gold strikes, of Indian wars and cattle drives, this was a story about something simpler and more profound. Two people who loved each other enough to commit completely, with or without society's blessing. The preacher who forgot the ceremony would have been forgotten entirely, lost to history like so many traveling preachers of that era. But because he broke down on the road that November day, because he failed to arrive when expected, he inadvertently became part of something beautiful. His absence created space for something more authentic, more meaningful than any official ceremony could have provided. And the cowboy who made his vows anyway, who looked at the woman he loved and decided that stars and sky and gathered community were witness enough, became a symbol of the kind of love that builds lasting legacies. Not because he had wealth or fame or power, but because he had the courage to love honestly and the integrity to honor his promises every single day in the end. That is what Willa and Thorne's life together proved. That love does not need grand gestures or elaborate ceremonies. It needs honest hearts, spoken promises, and the will to keep those promises through whatever life brings. It needs the courage to commit when circumstances are not perfect, the strength to persevere through hardship, and the wisdom to cherish what truly matters. They found all of that and more under the stars in Beaver, Utah, on November 15, 1878. They built a life on the foundation of promises made without official blessing, and that life proved more solid, more enduring than any legal document could have made it. They loved deeply and truly, raised good children who became good adults, served their community with dedication and grace, and left behind a legacy that inspired generations. The stars that witnessed their vows still shine over the land they loved, unchanged by the passage of time. The land itself endures, shaped by the hands of people like Willa and Thorne, who worked it with respect and care. And the love story that began when a preacher forgot a ceremony, and a cowboy made his vows anyway continues to echo through the years, a testament to the power of commitment freely given and faithfully kept. This is how love stories should end, not with dramatic flourish but with quiet satisfaction, not with unresolved yearning but with promises kept and lives well lived. Willa Preston came west seeking independence and found it, along with love and purpose and family. Thomas Thorne inherited a ranch and built it into something prosperous, but his greater inheritance was the life he built with Willa, the family they raised, the love they shared. They were buried side by side under the vast Utah sky, under the stars that had witnessed their most important promises. And if you visit their grave on a clear night, when the stars shine bright and the air is still, you might feel something special in that place. Not ghosts or spirits, but something more fundamental, the presence of love that was real and true and lasting. The kind of love that transcends death itself, that continues to inspire and encourage long after the lovers have passed on. The preacher forgot the ceremony, but the cowboy made his vows anyway under the stars. And those vows, spoken from the heart and kept with honor, proved more binding, more meaningful, more enduring than any official ceremony could ever be. That is the legacy of Thomas and Willa Thorne, a legacy of love freely given and faithfully maintained, of courage and commitment, and choosing to build something beautiful together against all odds. Their story ended as all good stories should, with peace, fulfillment, and the knowledge that they had loved well and lived fully. The stars that witnessed their vows continue to shine, eternal and unchanging, watching over the land and the people below. And somewhere, in the space between earth and sky, two souls who made promises under those stars so long ago remain together, their love story complete but never truly ended, living on in the hearts and memories of all who hear it and understand what it means to love with courage and commitment and unwavering faith.